Welcome to the Rancher's Voice, presented by the Montana Stockgrowers Association. I'm Jay Bodner, MSGA's Executive Vice President.
And I'm Raylee Honeycutt, Director of Natural Resources. Join us for conversations surrounding policy, the legislature, and issues that matter most to ranching families in Montana.
Welcome to this week's episode. We had a lot going on last week, so we're going to be touching on a few of those important things. I think importantly, we had some big discussions that came out of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service regarding the Endangered Species Act. We also had some recent appointments from the Governor Gianforte and how those new boards are getting along, so we'll be touching on that. We also do have our invited guest, Krista Lee Evans, and we'll be talking a little bit about water policy and some of the bills that we've seen at the legislature. And then also just talk about last week's legislative highlights and what we expect for this week.
We'd like to thank you for joining us on The Rancher's Voice. Remember to follow us on social. Make sure to like, comment, and share on each of our episodes. And if you have questions, send those questions to Kenny, Keni, at mtbeef.org.
So we'll start off with the Endangered Species Act. We just got a recent decision from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that they are recommending no change in the current listing of the status for the grizzly bear. So they're currently listed as a threatened species. They did a 5-year status review. One of the things that I think generally concerned us is that as you look at the population levels in both the Northern Continental Divide and the Yellowstone ecosystems, those are biologically recovered. We've met those recovery goals, and yet we're still looking at retaining those threatened species, that status as a threatened species. So we're pretty disappointed in that decision. It does limit a lot of the management tools that ranchers have and can use to protect our livestock and our livelihoods. And so I think it is important for us to continue to move forward. So what is MSGA going to do? We are going to continue to work with officials with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We do know some of those that are pretty high ranking, so we're in conversations with them. There also is an opportunity through congressional legislation that would nationally delist grizzly bears. And while we know that that's going to face a difficult challenge, certainly there's an opportunity there that we want to explore and continue on. And there also at the state level, there are a number of state programs with livestock loss and FWP and some of the carcass removal programs, and that we're also going to be sharing those with producers that are potentially faced with grizzly bear issues.
Last week, the U.S. Geological Survey also released their study on sage grouse related to habitat, population, and long-term trends. From their modeling is showing a significant decrease in the populations over multiple different ranges of time, and looks pretty grim from their research. So just know that is one set of data. There's another set of different models that are coming that look that look more optimistic as it relates to leks and the number of leks and really what those long, medium, and short-term frames are for population. I guess the key takeaway is, though, that we need to be tracking this report and having conversations about the report and what we're seeing from a state standpoint, because we believe that the BLM and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will be using this data to make decisions moving forward with the new administration as it relates to sage grouse, and believe that they will try to use this data to seek justification on listing sage grouse on the list. And so what we're doing is really trying to continue to have conversations. We've already had multiple conversations with DNRC. The Sage Grouse program falls under that agency. Working with them, they're proactively putting together information and success stories about what our state is doing and how we, and honestly, the Montana data set is looking much better than other regions of the country. And so really trying to lift up our program, showing that what we're doing is working under state management. And then we will continue to participate in MSGA, which is the Sage Grouse Oversight Team, along with working with BLM officials to continue sharing the successes that the program has had within the state of Montana.
Yeah, we've also just had an opportunity to have the new Board of Livestock meeting with the new board members. That's chaired by Gene Curry, our past president. We've talked a little bit about those new board members. They had a long meeting, but it actually ran really well. MSGA, we only can participate virtually on those meetings still, but we did get an opportunity to welcome the new board members. They did have a pretty lengthy discussion about brand re-record, and then also looking at some of the conflict policies with brands. And MSGA did put together a brand working group where we want to work with the department to look at potentially opening up some of these new brands that would be available to producers across the state. We did offer up to have a participant on that brand working group as the board looked at. They are in the process of really developing this brand working group. And so we will have some people on that to continue to work on that.
And then in the opening, Jay mentioned Governor Gianforte has made some additional appointments over the last month. And so we are looking forward to sharing those with you. For the Rangeland Resources Committee, which falls under DNRC, we have 3 reappointments. So John Hollenbach of Gold Creek, Diane Algren of Winnett, and Sigrid Jensen of Elmo have all been reappointed to that committee. And then we have some new members joining as well. So Leah Lewis out of Boulder, she is an MSGA member. Ron Devlin out of Terry, also an MSGA member. And then Jim Anderson from the Highline area will all be new appointments coming onto that board. And then from the Montana Grass Commission standpoint, 2 new board members will be joining as well, Jess Strange of Ismay, as well as Nathan Deschmaker of Lewistown. So we're excited to work with all of these new folks and the folks that have been reappointed as they kind of move into their new roles on serving on these boards. The last thing we wanted to highlight was this past week, we also hosted individuals from MSU's Collegiate Stockgrower group, and they visited the Capitol. We had a really great afternoon with them, lots of interaction with different lawmakers and elected officials. And so we really just want to thank Senator Mike Lang from the chair of the Senate Ag Committee, Secretary of State Christy Jacobson, Speaker Galt, as well as Lieutenant Governor Juris, and Mike Honeycutt, and a few members of the Board of Livestock for meeting with our Collegiate Stockgrower group and discussing different issues as it relates to the legislature, bills, and how the livestock department works. And so in addition to all those meetings, the group was also able to sit in and watch some of the House floor session, which was really great. And we really enjoyed hosting them and showing them a little bit about what Jay and I do on a daily basis.
Yeah, it really was fun to have them in. And we did on the House floor, had an opportunity to watch a little bit about the floor debate dealing with really the big funding package coming out of Congress and how Montana will divide that money up. So it was pretty interesting, and I'd like to thank them for coming to town. It was fun.
So this last week, we're going to hit on some highlights of some of the bills that we covered, but just wanted to just give you a kind of highlight of what the week looks like. So at the end of the week, the legislature ended on Thursday to take their long Easter break. So there were no committee hearings on Friday. They also have no hearings scheduled for Monday of the week of April 5th. And so really, what that ends us with is that the appropriation bill deadline is looming at the middle of the week of April 5th. And so once they return, they really only have 1 to 2 days to kind of finalize any bills that have dollars tied to them and get them transmitted to the second chamber to meet that deadline. So for the most part, and most of the bills that we're tracking have already had their hearings. They may need to have some type of floor action, but we will see a few bills pop up in the next couple days. They'll try to push those through to meet the deadline, and then we'll kind of pass that deadline and know how we're sitting for the rest of the session. To give you a couple updates on some bills that we have worked on or have been tracking, MSGA's priority bill, House Bill 660, is in regards to the Made in Montana program and receiving additional funding for that program to do marketing on value-added and made in Montana and grown in Montana products. It did pass out of the committee, the Appropriations Committee 2 weeks ago, but it did have its hearing, second and third readings on the House floor this past week and has since passed the House and is being transmitted to the Senate. So we're excited to see that bill continuing on. Additionally, House Bill 681 was heard in House Agriculture. This bill is in regards to providing a fund account for port authorities, and really there are two primary ports that are in the state that do export. One's in Butte, one's in Shelby, and then there are a variety of smaller port authorities. I believe in the hearing they said roughly 15 around the state. So this funding would be available for any port authority to apply for funding for infrastructure. One of the big conversations right now around the legislature is in regards to getting an intermodal facility kind of up and running in the Shelby port. And so that was the primary discussion of this bill, but really having money to provide to folks for infrastructure is an investment that benefits ag producers across the state, no matter what commodity, and will also allow for increased opportunity in export markets as well as value-added pricing for our producers. So we stood in support of that. It was passed out of House Ag Committee and then was redirected to House Appropriations. So it is scheduled to have its hearing early this week for its appropriations hearing. The second bill that was heard in House Natural Resources is Senate Bill 302, and that's in regards to navigable riverbeds. We've talked about this briefly, but what it really does is if you have a structure below the water line on any navigable riverbeds, you need to be applying through DNRC for a license, lease, or easement. The deadline for that was July 15th, 2021, but this bill simply extends that deadline to July 15th, 2025. So we'll have 4 more years for folks to get those applications in. And from an MSGA standpoint, we'll be working and communicating with our members on how to do that easily and get you the information so that you can get your license, lease, or easement.
So in the House Ag Committee, we had House Bill 697. This would reimburse landowners for crop damage by wildlife. And the bill did have some focus that it was only in those areas, those hunting districts where the population of wildlife was 200% over objective, and that there's also limited licenses or permits that are available. So it did narrow that focus. We did come in support of this bill. It did recognize, I think in Montana, that we do have a number of these hunting districts, and it kind of varied anywhere from 17 to roughly 19 or 20 that do meet this criteria. So we do know that there are a lot of these areas that are over objective, and it really focused on elk mainly. And we do think it is important to recognize that landowners are impacted by this. Now, this is a pretty significant change in Montana law if this were to move forward. Dealing with crop damage, the committee did have a pretty significant discussion about it. At the end, they did recognize that, and they did pass that out of committee. Also in House Ag, we had House Bill 677. This is a bill that did get a lot of interest, I think, among landowners, some in support, some in opposition. This revised laws and it would prohibit certain nonprofit organizations to purchase ag land. And I think from a Montana Stockgrower perspective, we did have a pretty lengthy discussion by our board on this particular bill. This bill did prohibit nonprofits from purchasing any ag land in parcels larger than 80 acres. And once again, we did have a lengthy discussion on this. We did have some policy that would support the concept and some that would oppose this concept. And we heard from members on both sides of this bill. So at the end of the day, our board voted to not take a position on this particular bill, but yet we did recognize the importance of this. And so we're going to form a committee that would look at it more from a tax structure and see if there's some opportunity opportunity there to address some of this ag land that gets taken out of ag production. And I think that's important for us. So this particular bill did have a lot of support and a lot of opposition. It did get heavily amended in committee, and then it was tabled at the end of the day on a unanimous vote. So
that's kind of a wrap up of what happened last week. And looking into this week, like I mentioned, we are working against that appropriations deadline that's in the middle of the week. And so we'll be watching any bills tied with appropriations that still have to have hearings. We have talked about bills, and we'll be tracking additional bills that need to still have executive action occur. But really, for the most part, we'll be at a good spot where we're really going to be able to track all of these appropriation bills, in addition to kind of the, smaller bills with appropriations. We still have House Bill 14 that will have another hearing in Senate Claim and Finance. That's that long-range bonding bill that the Veterinary Diagnostic Lab, Wool Lab, and some of the maize projects are in, as well as 632, which is the COVID funding or ARPA money, which again has agricultural products in it. And so as those kind of start going through Senate Finance and Claims, and the other side of the chamber will be involved with those and tracking those as they go through different hearings.
This week, we've invited Krista Lee Evans to join us, and Krista Lee Evans runs Blake Creek Consulting. Krista Lee Evans certainly has been a real resource for us and his organization. She's talked in front of a number of our committees, our water policy committees, and she is certainly very in-depth in water policy, looking through bills, was a previous drafter at the Legislative Services. So I'd like to welcome Krista Lee Evans.
Hello, we would like to welcome our next guest to the podcast. Today we have Krista Lee Evans of Blake Creek Consulting, and we are here jumping on to talk about water rights. So welcome, Krista.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it.
So let's just dive into some general water rights conversations, and then we'll talk about the legislature and some bills that we've been seeing. So first off, you kind of help coordinate the Senior Water Rights Coalition, and Montana Stockgrowers is one of the members that participates in that coalition. So tell us just a little bit about that coalition and why it's important for water right holders in agriculture.
So Senior Water Rights Coalition is important because water rights is an interesting issue. It's not Republican or Democrat. It's really who has water and who wants water. And so as the supply and demand curves cross in water availability in different basins across the state, the challenges for those that hold existing water rights or senior water rights is becoming greater and greater. And so it's important for everybody to stick together and to work on issues cooperatively and work hard to protect the property rights of all of the different memberships so that people can continue to run their businesses.
Excellent. And from our perspective as a member, it's also great. We meet weekly during session and kind of have that opportunity to coordinate and strategize about the best position for senior water right holders within the state, which many of the organizations involved have great knowledge and assets for that conversation. So let's talk a bit about just general water law. And for our listeners, some of them may be really familiar with water law and involved with it on a regular basis, but some may not be as familiar. So just chat a little bit about like some must know portions of water law that you think our listeners need to kind of have top of mind when they dive into water issues.
So Montana is considered a prior appropriation doctrine state, and really all of the Western United States are prior appropriation states. And east of the Mississippi is riparian doctrine. So that's a significant difference. Prior appropriation means first in time, first in right. And why that's important for agriculture is that a lot of the most senior rights are agriculture and or mining. If you think about how Montana was developed and what type of water use was done, the agriculture and mining are generally the most senior water rights in the state. In addition, the other piece of that is that in order to have a water right, it has to be put to beneficial use. So you can't just sit on a water right. You have to actually use it, whether that's irrigation or municipal or industrial. So those are important elements on water rights that are important to remember. And then the other piece of it is period of use. So period of use is important. Irrigation rights are generally seasonal, whereas a municipal right or a stock right are generally year round. So there's some basic parameters associated with water rights, but the big thing is use it or lose it. And I always recommend to the folks that I work with that, you take pictures throughout the years, documenting that you've used it. You do a good job of maintaining your infrastructure, whether that's cleaning your ditches, maintaining your head gates, et cetera, because there truly is a significant increased demand for water in Montana, and challenges of our water rights, I believe, are going to get more and more and more. So the more documentation you have as a water right owner, the better in the event you are ever challenged on whether or not your water right's been abandoned.
And can you just talk us a little bit through what that challenge might look like, or how a challenge were to happen?
Right. So Montana is interesting so there's two different tracks in Montana. The water adjudication, which applies to the pre-1973 water rights or claims that most, if not all, agricultural producers filed. And within that process, you should expect to be challenged. That's the way the process is set up, is for neighbor to object to neighbor. The other side of that is for new appropriations, and that's anything after 1973. And in all honesty, where the challenges would come from, there is a huge demand for water in some of our basins in Montana. As folks move into the state, as we have new uses and demands for water in basins that are fully appropriated, so that means that no more water is available. It's all been spoken for. That provides a significant challenge for new uses, whether that's somebody who wants to put in a new irrigation pivot, whether that's a subdivision, whether that's an industrial use. Any new use has significant challenges because all the water's already got somebody's name on it. And so one of the mechanisms that has been used and will continue to be used is the claim that, Farmer Jones's water right has been abandoned and they're not truly using it. So and I'm not trying to put, the fear factor out there. It's just important. It's a property right. It's important to protect it. It's important to document its use. And then when or if that question comes up, you can be like, no, sorry, I've been using it and here's the proof. Excellent.
Well, let's jump into legislative session a little bit. There's been quite a few water bills that we've worked on this session, and wanted to highlight a couple for our listeners. So we've seen quite a few come as it relates to bills that have come through the WIPIC committee, or the interim water committee. And so let's talk about those first. Senate Bill 13, which is about adjudication benchmarks, is one of those bills. So can you tell the listeners a little bit about that and where it is in the process?
Right. So Senate Bill 13 came out of the Water Policy Interim Committee. And the reason a Senior Water Rights Coalition and a majority, if not all of the ag groups, supported that bill. Senate Bill 13 is important for, there's two primary pieces in that bill. One is it allows the water court judge to put any outstanding issues into what are called supplemental or interlocutory decrees. And that's good for us as water right users, because that means we only have to go to court once more. We don't have to go on our temporary or preliminary decrees and a supplemental decree. And we could get into the weeds on what those different decrees are, but I don't think we have enough time to do that. And then the other piece of it is there's benchmarks. So back in the day, the legislature when the adjudication was struggling as far as timelines. So the legislature put in benchmarks and said if DNRC didn't complete examinations by certain dates, a certain number of claims, then they didn't get funded. And it was a way for the legislature to put some pressure on the executive to move through this process more expeditiously. So if you guys remember last session, there was a bill that gave the opportunity for in-stream stock and domestic to file exempt from filing claims, not exempt wells, but exempt from filing claims. So those all came in, and there's about 25 or 30,000 of those. And it was kind of buggering up the process within DNRC and the timelines. And so the interim benchmarks were extended, but the final date by which all claims had to be examined doesn't change. So that bill is really just a timeline bill, and it allows the water court judge to put more into those decrees. And what that means for water users is if or when a water court decree comes out in your basin, you better be paying attention, because everything's going to be in it, or as much as possible. So it's important to engage. If you get notice of a water court decree and you don't understand necessarily what that means, call the Stockgrowers office, and I can work with them to help get some information out for folks so they fully understand what their options are.
Excellent. Yes, always we're here as a resource. So the next one, you mentioned filing claims. So the next one is Senate Bill 55, that was kind of the process and automation of water rights. So share a little bit about Senate Bill 55 and what that does.
Senate Bill 55 is also a bill that came out of the Water Policy Interim Committee, and that has to do with ownership updates. And so House Bill 22, and I believe that was in the 2005 session. In that process, it became clear that the water rights ownership database was very inaccurate. The database is important, okay, because the database is the mechanism that the water court uses to provide public notice on when decrees are issued. The database is constitutionally required. The Constitution requires that the state keep track of the water rights. The other important thing to understand about water rights is that the deed trumps all. Okay, so regardless of what the database says, if the deed is silent, the water transfers with the deed. Okay, so but what was happening is these water right ownership updates weren't occurring, and really it's on us in agriculture as the entities buying or selling property. It's really, really important to file the proper form with DNRC, because there's no way they can know who owns what property unless we tell them, because you can sever water from property. You can transfer only a portion of the water. So there's a lot of complexities on how, when there's a land sale or a land deal that goes on, how or if water's involved in that. So it really is up to us to define that. But what was happening is that doesn't necessarily occur. And so House Bill 39, which was in the 2005 session, I believe, wanted to try to automate the process to use geocodes as much as possible. And it's not really a one-to-one fit, because geocodes are designed as a parcel identifier for taxing purposes. So it doesn't match exactly with our water rights. There was some concern that the department, DNRC, maybe wasn't going the direction that landowners and water users needed them to go. So really what Senate Bill 55 does is it provides more clear direction to the department on what they do, depending on what type of information they get. So bottom line is it's our responsibility to file the form. If we file the form and we file the recorded deed with the department, then it shouldn't be a problem. The problems come up when the people selling or purchasing the land don't file the proper forms. So anyway, so that's what Senate Bill 55 does. It should fix some issues where the wrong people's names were getting put on our water rights, and we were having to go to court to get them off. So bottom line, if you want to make sure your information's right, file the right form. If the form's not filed or is filed incorrectly, we have some steps in 55 that the department has to follow to make sure that the database is as accurate as possible.
Excellent. Now let's hop over to liability and Senate Bill 307. And this really is a limited liability on infrastructure for water. And so share a little bit about what that bill does for our producers.
So Senate Bill 307 it amends a statute. So there's an existing statute that says ditches. If you're the owner of a ditch, you're not liable, and you don't have a duty to say fence, et cetera, because we all know we can't fence an entire ditch. What happened is there was a Supreme Court case, and they said that the judges said, or maybe I think it was just district court, I apologize. it was a district court case, and the judge said, well, if the legislature meant more than just a ditch, say a canal or a flume or a diversion structure, they would have said that. And so what this bill does is it adds in additional language. The things that when we talk about a ditch in agriculture, it just is kind of all encompassing. But when the court interpreted that statute, it was not all encompassing. It was just a ditch. So maybe just a lateral off a canal. So what Senate Bill 307 does is it applies to it tried to make clear that the original intent of that language was all of our irrigation infrastructure, and that we don't have a liability associated with that if somebody enters the property uninvited, right? So if somebody's walking their dog or accesses the property or trespasses, that it's not our fault if somebody gets hurt in the project or with, if they fall in the ditch, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what that bill does. It's done really, really well in the legislature, and is currently, it passed out of House Ag, and so it'll be on the House floor either today or early next week. The legislators will be gone Friday and Monday for Easter break. But yeah, so that one's moving along pretty well too.
Excellent. Well, let's talk a little bit about an issue that has kind of been happening in parallel to legislative session. And a lot of times people really have been focusing on session. But at the end of 2020, the permanent water settlement for the CSKT Compact occurred, and that has been ratified. So what kind of updates can you give our listeners on where that compact is, its ratification, and then next steps for the state of Montana?
So the CSKT Compact, we talked earlier about the adjudication process, and CSKT is a federal reserved water right. It's a little bit different than our state-based water rights. And so as a state, we had two options. We could either litigate or negotiate and settle. And what the state has done is they settled through the compact. And in order for a settlement to be valid, it has to be ratified by all three parties. The parties to the compact are the state, the feds, and the tribe. And so the state ratified in 2015. I believe that was at 15. The feds ratified in the end of 2020, and then the tribe also ratified the end of 2020. So the compact is in place, and there's kind of two different pieces. There's the actual compact that settles their state-based water right claims, and then there's the federal settlement that came from the federal government, and that's separate and distinct. But with the compact now, what happens is the compact will have to be filed with the Montana Water Court, and there's about 6 months-ish worth of time, and that will be filed by the tribe. That has not occurred. All federal reserve compacts in the state have to be filed with the water court, and so the CSKT is no different. There will be opportunities to object to the compact in the water court, just like there are against any of the other state-based claims. So we're just going to have to pay attention and engage in the water court if folks are interested in objecting to all or a portion of the compact.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time. I know that was a lot of information we just threw out to our listeners, but there has been a lot of water policy discussions this session, and we just hit the highlights. There are even more that we could do another separate podcast on for sure. So thank you so much, Krista, for your time. You are a great resource for myself, along with many other folks around the Capitol, and we really appreciate you joining us and sharing a little bit more about water in Montana.
Thanks, Raylee.
All right. Talk soon. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Once again, we'd like to thank Krista for joining us this week. She certainly has a lot of in-depth knowledge when it comes to water policy. Certainly being able to review these water policy bills and how it impacts us as senior water rights. So once again, I'd like to thank Krista for joining us this week. I'd also just like to thank everybody for joining us this week. If you like what you've been hearing, we'd like to invite you to become a member of MSGA, and you can join us. Just look at our website at mtbeef.org and look on the membership tab, or just give our office a call.
And And we'd like to thank you again for listening. So make sure you have subscribed to The Rancher's Voice. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or Twitter. And make sure to like, comment, and share on each episode. We would also love to hear from you. So submit your questions to us at Kenny, KENI, @mtbeef.org. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.